The Open University of Hong Kong hosted the 2016 International Conference on Open and Flexible Education at its Jubilee College campus. The first keynote speaker was our Vice President for Administration and Development, Professor Lee Wing-on. Professor Lee spoke about how the need to equip students with 21st century competences has changed the nature of learning, and how open and flexible pedagogies have transformed both the curriculum and the role of the teacher.
It is my great honor today to be asked to deliver the first presentation in this very important conference. And the title of the conference is also very important, namely Open and Flexible Education. It is my honor and my luck to be able to join the Open University of Hong Kong. And because working here every day, we are thinking of one issue: how to make Open University of Hong Kong more open, and how to offer and deliver education in a more flexible manner, and how to provide programs that are not provided by other universities, but relevant to the market, relevant to the market changes, relevant to the skill changes, and relevant to all the learners who may want to come to Open University to have education with us. I have now worked here for a year and a half, and being baptized here for a year and a half, I tend to think Open University of Hong Kong is the only place to offer open education, because this is our everyday discussions. It is an excitement to have that discussion with many of my colleagues who are sitting here. But today, when I was asked to share with you on this very important occasion, I think I would like to talk about how the movement towards open and flexible education is realized in learning, and how open and flexible learning will affect the learning behavior and learning pattern of the students, and how the changes in learning behavior of the student will affect the teachers who are teaching them. Sometimes, because of the changes of the learning behavior and learning pattern and way of learning of our students, teachers may feel redundant, may feel ourselves redundant. Indeed, we are quite redundant in many ways. And how to make redundant people not redundant and still useful and relevant. And this is something I'm going to explore with you in the next hour. I started to engage my research on 21st century competencies when I had an opportunity to work in Singapore, being in charge of the research office at the National Institute of Education there. 21st century competence is a national policy in Singapore, and therefore 21st century competencies in education has become a focus and a priority of research in education research in Singapore as well. So I got the opportunity of working with many other countries who were also interested in developing 21st century competencies. I have to say, about 10 years ago, when we were facing, or when we were preparing ourselves to face the advent, the coming of the year 2000, the millennium, people begin to say, we are moving into the 21st century. And because we are moving into the 21st century, our society will become 21st century society, and then our education will become a 21st century education system, and the skills of our students will become 21st century skills. But it seems to be quite a general cliche that we are moving towards 21st century, therefore we will become 21st century people, and we need those kind of skills. But what is exactly 21st century skill or competencies? I think it was quite ad hoc at the time when a lot of people were raising it. And it was not until the last 5 or just more than 5 years, I find some convergence from my analysis of how people were studying 21st century competencies. What I want to say is, at the beginning, when people started to talk about 21st century competencies, it was only a slogan. But in time, when we are working more and more towards it, an agenda seemed to emerge, which also converge. Let me share with you some example. There is great effort of education reform in the United States to prepare for a new set of curriculum. But this education reform is not only undertaken by educationists or policymakers. This was done together with many technology companies, including Dell, Apple, Cisco, you name it. Many IT companies were involved. Many technology companies were involved. So it shows that the new education system being developed in the United States is technology related. And it also shows technology will play a very important role in the future educational agenda in the United States. For those who know the United States, this is the new education reform that is shaping the US education system. In this reform, we can see an expansion of the core subject. It used to be 3 hours, reading, writing, and arithmetic. But today, the core subjects will become 5 hours. There will be more and more subjects involved. It will become more interdisciplinary to become the core subject. In the past, education was, or knowledge acquisition was being associated with ivory tower. But in the new education system, it is related to life career. It is related to practice. It is related to life skill. It is related to flexibility and adaptability, initiative, self-directed learning, and social and cross-cultural skill, productivity, accountability, leadership, and responsibility. And there are lots of mention of creativity and innovation, critical thinking, and problem solving. And not only that, in addition to the national standards being developed for the new education system for the US citizens, it is very comprehensive. It comes with a set of new assessment. It comes with new curriculum and instruction guidelines, and it comes with professional development for teachers to be able to become a change agent in the classroom. So there was a holistic plan, but the focus of education has expanded beyond knowledge acquisition, having more emphasis on life, practice, career, and criticality, thinking skills, and creativity. Another major project was called ATC 21S, involving 6 countries. When I was working in Singapore, Singapore was one of the 6 countries, and it was led by Australia. And in this project on 21st century skill, actually, the cross-country team developed a new philosophy of education, focusing on way of thinking, way of working, tools for working, and living in the world. Again, education is not just for acquiring knowledge, but about how to live in the world, how to work, and also how to think. OECD is the backbone of many PISA studies, and it has a framework focusing on heterogeneity, interactivity, and also acting autonomously by individuals. I will talk more about PISA and the direction of PISA, but the PISA assumptions are based on interaction, between people, application of knowledge to daily life, and how individuals are motivated to learn autonomously. And self-directed learning is one of those. So there's a paper published in 2012 summarizing all these different efforts of 21st century framework development in projects undertaken in different countries. And he finds that most of these 21st century projects focus on collaboration, communication, ICT literacy, social and cultural competencies, including citizenship. And most of these frameworks mention creativity, critical thinking, productivity, and problem solving. 10 years ago, before summarizing these projects, 21st century was a very vague concept, maybe just a vague slogan. It might be an ad hoc terminology. But after that, in time, after development for about 10 years or 15 years, 21st century seems to be a commonly acknowledged vehicle for the emerging knowledge economy. And for the global society that is experiencing rapid changes and uncertainty for the future. And because of all the uncertainties that come along, it is more and more unpredictable for how the economy will develop and how our younger generation can get jobs, because jobs are disappearing. New jobs are coming, but we do not know how to systematize them, how to grasp them. So it depends on the creativity of the young people to adapt to the change and to adapt to uncertainty and unknown, and for the unknown future. Commonly, if we combine all these projects together, they commonly emphasize thinking skill, interpersonal skill, ICT skills, and also life skills, to summarize all these efforts. When I was living in Singapore, I tried to analyze the development of 21st century competencies in Singapore. I found the effort started in 1997. For our audience living in Hong Kong, 1997 was a very important year for Hong Kong people because it was the year Hong Kong becoming part of China. But it was also a very important year for Singapore. It was this year Singapore announced a national policy. Singapore will go globalization, internationalization, and will formally adopt 21st century as the national policy. And this is the 21st century framework developed. If you study Singapore, this diagram comes out very, very often. They call this Swiss roll. And this Swiss roll places emphasis on 4 attributes of a learner. The learner has to be a self-directed learner. The learner has to be a confident person. The learner has to be a concerned citizen, concerning about their own society. And the learner has to be an active contributor. Of course, more closer to the core of the Swiss roll are other self-attributes, including self-awareness, self-management, and also relationship management. You can see that the growth of the 21st century become a set of attributes related to how the self is managed, how the self become a motivated person, how the self can be related to other self. And this is a set of skills and mindset and outcome developed in the Singapore curriculum. If we look at the set of skills and outcome and mindset to be generated from the new education system in Singapore, you find those attributes very familiar. Thinking independently, have good interpersonal skills, have self-initiative in learning, and have good problem-solving skill. And this person has to be multicultural and should embrace diversity and respect diversity and able to communicate with people coming from different cultural backgrounds and also being an active engager in the society, contributing to the development of the society. And because of this focus on 21st century competencies, the Singapore government in the education system invite co-construction from all the learners in the Singapore education system. In the past, we look at Singapore as a centralized, strong state. But with the development of 21st century skills as the major agenda in the education system, it becomes more and more decentralized. It becomes more and more focusing on enabling individuals to become a co-construction participant for the future of the society. So individuals are becoming more and more important in the education system. And that's why, or this is the major reason why Singapore ranked top in many of the international comparative exercises about student performance. Individuals become the target of the education system. But when I am looking at other studies, it seems that it concurs with other international studies. This is a diagram on multiple citizenship or global citizenship by a group of people led by John Cogan from Minnesota University. In his study about global citizenship, he thinks a person should have multiple identity and multiple skill and capacity to respect diversity and face diversity in the future. Interestingly, all these attributes generated from 21st century competence are not from the cognitive areas, are not from the knowledge areas. They are talking about the emotive dimension of the person, the interpersonal dimension of the person. So they are about the attributes talking about confidence, communication skill, interpersonal skill, intercultural skill, collaborative skill, self-management skill. All these are not cognitive. And some people say these are all soft skills. When you say soft skills, these are actually quite revolutionary. Because if we look at the history of our education, education has been cognitive. And cognitive education has been about the ability to define what is fact, what is knowledge. And because we used to be able to define what is fact, what is knowledge, it is also significantly influenced by empiricism and rationalism. And because of all this cognitive base, education in the past has been accessible, has become measurable. So we went to exam with the assumption that if we got the fact right, we got the understanding right, we acquired the knowledge right, we are able to score well in exam. And this is the fundamental assumption in all the exam settings. And our education system actually prepared the young people to sit for exam. And all these are founded on the cognitive assumption. And cognitive assumption is founded on empiricism and rationalism. And they become factual, they are measurable. But the more we talk about 21st century skill, if you think more about it, you find actually the emphasis on those skills are quite revolutionary because they are not measurable. Up to now, I don't know how to measure creativity. I don't know whether you know. I don't know how to measure collaborative skill, although I know how to measure to some extent. I don't know how to tell a government. When I was in Singapore, because I was in charge of research, the government always came to me, Wing on how to measure social-emotional skill. And I always have a problem. I cannot tell a government or a system how many percent of creativity plus how many percent of collaborations plus how many percent of interpersonal skill plus how many percent of self-management skill can make the person a successful person, and how successful this person can become. and I cannot define. We only say they are important, and everyone agrees they are important. But we move into a dimension, a new area, that we all think important. Even for the Singapore's curriculum that I showed you just a few minutes ago, all the attributes advocated in the new system are not measurable in terms of self-confidence, in terms of self-directed learning, in terms of interpersonal skill, and so on and so forth. So some people say these are social capital versus knowledge, human capital. Social capital is focusing on social skill. Human capital is focusing on cognitive knowledge. Human capital is focused on hard skill, and social capital is focusing on soft skill. Anything hard is measurable, anything soft is not measurable, but we think the soft things are more important than the hard thing emerging. Here is another revolution. Ernest Boyer, in a book called Scholarship Reconsidered, suggested there are 4 ways to acquire knowledge or to create scholarship. One is discovery. Second is integration. Integration is integrating different disciplines. It means interdisciplinary integration. Third is application, when you apply the knowledge. Especially, there are professions that require application of knowledge, such as social work, medical doctors, psychiatrists, and counselors, and teachers. In the process of application, you can generate knowledge. Last is teaching. Actually, I'm a teacher. I've been a teacher trainer for more than 2 decades. I wanted to be a teacher, and the reason I enjoy to teach is not that I have something to pass on. 20 years ago, when I started to be a teacher, I had a strong belief I had something to share, to teach. But the longer I teach, the more I find my students are smarter than me. So teaching my students is no longer my satisfaction. How can I learn in the process of teaching? Become new agenda in my teaching life. And the longer I teach, the more I abandon teaching, and I ask my student to teach. And I enjoy asking my student to teach because when my students teach, I don't need to teach. And my students say, after teaching a class, being invited by me, they learn more than listening to my boring lecture. Today, I enjoy teaching because when I teach, I learn. So these are the elaborations which I have just talked about. This is important mainly because in the past, only basic research, only discovery generated knowledge. But now, practice generates knowledge. Application generates knowledge. The process of passing on knowledge generates knowledge. The value of getting knowledge becomes broader and broader and broader. So that's why teachers become more and more confused, because students no longer rely on teachers to get knowledge. They can get knowledge from experience. And it is because of this broader and broader and broader and wider and more ways of getting knowledge, schooling has become more confused. The border between formal education, informal education, and non-formal education have become more blurred. So a lot of activities today after school become the main learning activities, actually. In Singapore, our researchers design a lot of games, a lot of learning games. And we ask the students to play those games after school, because during the classroom, we don't have time to play those games together. So we ask them, instead of doing boring homework, assignment, we invented the games, designed games. And then many of those games are Second Life, a virtual reality, and they have to go into the game and take a role and interact with another person and then get some experience in the process of learning, getting involved in those games. And after that, in the next class, instead of teaching, we began to ask the students, what did you experience last night, yesterday? What did you experience from participating in the game. What have you learned? Actually, the classroom context and contents also change, because no longer were the teachers telling what students need to know. Classroom become a platform for sharing. Actually, in today's world, it is a flipped classroom. And in Singapore, we flipped classroom more than 5 years ago, because students are no longer listening to the teacher for the first time. They learn beforehand. They participated in the games beforehand. They come to the classroom to share. And likewise, many learning activities were experiential in terms of service learning, in terms of internship. Today, almost all universities offer internship. Even secondary school offer internship. Internship is becoming more important mainly because of experiential learning. The students cannot feel satisfied only by learning from the books or from the teachers. They learn by participating in the experience. Actually, today, who defines knowledge becomes more confusing. And because of the possibility of the students coming to know by engaging themselves in those games, in those experiences, and they learn while they are engaged, the society is also stepping in to tell you whether your knowledge is useful or valuable or not. I remember about 20 years ago, when I was visiting the University of Minnesota as a visiting scholar. That year was a very alarming year to me, because during the month I was staying in Minnesota, the government announced the budget for the university. And University of Minnesota was a first-class university, very high-performing university, but the government decided to cut the university for funding for 15%, and it alarmed the whole community, and a lot of protests saying the government was wrong. But the government's answer was, I know you're performing, I know you're a good university, but are you useful? If you are useful, you should get the money and the income, the revenue from your students, from the community. And if you are able to get the money from the community, it means you are really useful. You don't rely on the government. And this is a way for us to push you. Today, knowledge is also defined by the stakeholders, not defined by the teachers. So all this makes schooling change. The 21st century competence agenda is, starting from the school, we talk about the possibility of knowledge building and knowledge creation by students, not by teachers. Beyond the classroom, we talk about experiential learning and the changing world become a motivation for learning, and the students have to respond to that. And beyond the classroom, there is a wider context for lifelong learning, mainly because job changes every 3 years. And students have to face many rounds of job application and adapt to the new requirements in the changing knowledge economy. And they have to lifelong learn. And the border between formal, non-formal, and informal learning become blurred. So the traditional paradigm is now from discovery to acquiring knowledge to application. It used to be the formula. But today, discovery is still important, but engagement and sharing is also very important. And because of that, we also need to teach students how to manage knowledge and create knowledge as well. We are to be successful in our teaching. And we also tell our students, or allow our students to learn through experiences. Last year, I had the luck of participating in a UNESCO conference, and I was being asked to be a rapporteur. My job was to listen to all the presentation and write a conclusion for the conference. Interestingly, in that conference, there were many agents coming to share their teaching and learning innovations. And you can see all those who share about their teaching and learning innovations are technology companies. They are using different technologies to create knowledge. And because of that, the definition of curriculum also changed. What is a curriculum? Traditionally, a curriculum is top-down. Somebody who knows the field, who knows the subject, who knows the discipline well, and design a curriculum for students to learn. But because of the availability of technology and the availability of big data, today, when people design curriculum, they look at the big data. They look at what are the interests of the students. What do they want to learn? So the curriculum is defined by students' learning orientation, learning preference, and also defined by the language they use, which we can capture in big data project, in corpus. So today, curriculum is being reversed. When we say curriculum, it is no longer top-down, it can be bottom-up, can be defined by the students. One technology is crowdsourcing, global digital citizens. Crowdsourcing is a big data project that captures students' participation in the classroom and language they use, and then trying to find the highest frequency of concepts and language they use, and put them into the curriculum. So the curriculum are tailor-made using students' input. So we have a new concept of curriculum. Also, we have a new concept for assessment. I think you know very well the notion of assessment of learning, assessment for learning, and assessment as learning. For the new assessment they share in that particular conference, there are companies trying to design assessment to tap students' attributes, value orientations, to tap students' preference in learning in a certain discipline. So it is really talking about assessment as learning, because in the process of assessment, the assessor no longer tries to assess whether the students have learned sufficiently, has passed the learning. But actually the assessor is trying to learn from the student by tapping their interest, by tapping their preference, in order to refine the curriculum and redefine the curriculum. So assessment tool become a tool to define and redefine curriculum. So this is assessment as learning. In this sense, students are no longer defined or being seen as a weaker subject, or as somebody who we need to feed to get knowledge. Students being used by crowdsourcing, being used by these new assessment technologies, become a source of learning for the educators, for the policymakers, for the curriculum designer. So there is a Japanese company saying that when they are designing new curriculum, new education strategies, they put forward two concepts. A weak structure is a structure that is dependent on a single discipline. A strong structure is a structure that combines various disciplines. So today we are moving into a multidisciplinary world. So as a conclusion of the UNESCO conference, we got a few keywords. One is our future education has to be inclusive because of diversity. And if we want equitable education, the future education has to be inclusive, has to be intercultural, because we are facing more and more diverse society. It has to be future-oriented. In the past, we learned what happened in the past, knowledge accumulated in the past. Now we are learning to prepare our students for the future. Today we learn because we need to learn in the context of co-creation. Not the teachers teaching, not the learners learning, not the students learning, but teachers and learners and students co-create. We create knowledge together. I want to share with you some direction, some changes in PISA measurement. I think you all know what is PISA. And PISA deviates from IEA international study by focusing on application instead of knowledge measurement. So in 2012, PISA wanted to measure creative problem solving. So this is the standard 21st century competencies. But in 2015, PISA promoted collaborative problem solving. And this is to test how students can work together to identify a problem and to solve a problem, and how much time they need to identify the problem and solve the problem. And this is very different from our conventional teaching and learning agenda. For thousands of years, actually our education system, our teaching and learning directions, approach was individual-oriented. We talk about independent learning. We talk about self-directed learning. We talk about exam performance. And in all those exam performance, we focus on individual performance. But now they are measuring group performance. PISA is measuring team performance. In future, you cannot survive as individual because the future society is a team competition society. We have to work with teams. What does it mean by working with teams? We have to know our strengths and weaknesses very clearly. And we should not feel ashamed of our weakness, but we find somebody who can complement our weakness and strengthen our team. But we offer our strength to the team as well to do something others cannot do. So in future, we are moving towards a team competition world. No one can win. We have to work in team to win. In 2018, PISA is going to measure global competence. What does it mean by global competence? Global competence is the awareness of the existence of competition globally. So people should not only go beyond the individual into teams, but also beyond your own country to the global situation, and to be aware of the development of the situations, of the circumstances, of the development outside your own cultural circle or political circle. So in 2018, PISA is preparing to measure how globally competent are our youngsters, our young people, whether they are aware of what's happening beyond, outside their own country, their own circle, whether they can cope with diversity, especially cultural diversity, and whether they can benefit from all the diversity. What I want to say is, today we are talking about open and flexible education. This open and flexible education for my colleagues working in Open University of Hong Kong is actually not confined to Open University of Hong Kong. The whole context of education in the society has already changed. I'm very proud to be in Open University of Hong Kong because this is a university that talks about open and flexible learning every day. But that's not enough. We need the whole system talking about it. And actually, I also would like to warn my colleagues, don't feel complacent. Actually, our neighboring universities may be more open than ourselves when we are talking about open learning. Maybe more flexible than ourselves. They have their own flexibilities. But this is something we have to face. The learning context has changed. The source of knowledge has changed. The learning activity has changed. The nature of learning has changed. Learning is becoming a process of creating knowledge. Teacher used to be in the center to deliver knowledge. But now, knowledge can be generated this way. You are still in the center, but you are bound to feel confused because no one is paying attention to you as a teacher. They learn from interacting with one another. Thank you very much.